the waiting room where these people for group therapy were sitting there. And he said,
Bernadette,
maybe it's as good as it gets. You know, that's all. Well, we had a wonderful psychiatric consultant in my department. The first one we had was Max Goldberg, who was not wonderful. He was a strict Freudian, you know. But this one, Bernson, was wonderful, and he was the one that told me that story about the nurse at Mount Sinai. He would say, you know, there's things that you shouldn't analyze, and if people are functioning in spite of this, leave it alone. They have made a good adaptation to whatever they were born with or whatever is going on in their physical condition or doing. So he said he knew a nurse in...
Fascinating story, yeah.
Okay. But James hasn't heard it.
Yeah, no,
I know. I tell the story to everyone that it's a marvelous story, and I know it's true because I knew Lionel Bernson, and he said that he had this nurse. There was a nurse that he worked with all the time. I think she was the head nurse in Mount Sinai's pediatrics, and he was the head psychiatrist. You're exchanging looks with James.
Oh no, I was just tape recording you.
Oh no.
But yeah, that was my, I said we have to make a video.
Of you talking.
Save it for me.
Don't do that.
It's too late. Now you have to finish the story.
I can't get his name. You see the problems I have? You'll prove Jonathan's point that I ramble on all the time.
I don't make that point.
I presume
we know that already.
I didn't think you would just do it before telling you secretly.
I'm not terribly upset about it.
Wait, I want to hear the story.
My sister always says, don't sweat the small stuff, and everything at our age is small stuff. You know, it's true. I have enough perspective to think that's not important, really. I don't care what you do.
Tell the story.
All right, let me finish the story. You've heard it, of course. And I guess you've heard it, maybe, Bernadette, but this is such a good story. This is a true story. And I knew Bernson, who was a wonderful, wonderful man, you know. Okay.
And who was he again? He was a neurologist?
Our psychiatric consultant, you know. You were part-time. I mean, in other words, we didn't have a full-time in our little department in Englewood, a full-time psychiatrist, but he would be the psychiatric consultant.
For you?
All right. Now, get back to the story. So he said, sometimes you just have to leave the symptoms alone. You don't analyze them. You don't talk about them or anything, because people, and he said, some people are wonderful. He said some of the nicest people are burned out psychopaths, by the way.
Really?
When they get much older, and he said, and the gonads stop sizzling, some of them turn out to be lovely people. So even that, you know. So he, of course, he didn't believe either in all these labels. So that's it. Right. You know. Okay. All right, now to get back to the story, which I keep avoiding getting. It's such a good story. Okay.
Save the best for last.
Telling us how you don't analyze the symptoms. He said, we had this wonderful nurse there, and he had just begun at that point as the head of that department, or just had come into Mount Sinai. So he had just begun to get to know the people on the staff, and he saw how she, you know, how well she ran the department. He admired her very much. And she, I don't know, she'd been there quite a while. She was an experienced person. She ran the whole pediatrics. I mean, she was like the head administrator. She was an RN, but she was really doing administration. But she said to him...
Okay, now was it pediatrics or neurology? Somehow I remember.
It was pediatrics. No, this was
okay.
pediatrics. So she said, she came in one day and they had, he was, I guess, they had sort of a room where people doing their residencies and even the other people, when they were not on duty or didn't have much going on, could even take a rest or sleep, and they were all sleep deprived. So he was this young person, was one day in that, it was a chapel, because I once opened the door to the chapel to see what prayers or what's going on there, and the people were sleeping on the benches, you know. So the chaplain, he was sleeping on a bench, and nobody else was in that chapel. And she came in, and she sat down next to him, and sort of, in some way, invited some overtures or some, maybe petted him a little or something. Not anything very overt, but nevertheless. And of course he didn't respond to that. And then a day or two later, she said, "I'd like to talk to you privately in the office here." And so he went in and he said, "The other day, I know I can trust you because I tested you out." And she mentioned what happened then, and I feel you're just the person you seem to be. You're not one of these people who cheats on your wife and family and all that. But I just want to tell you something because she said, I'd like to talk to you because I admire your work and I know you're a good psychiatrist. She said, "I have problems that I can't sleep and I have a big problem with insomnia." And he said, "Well, what do you attribute it to?" And she said, "Every night when I go to bed, the whole bed rises up close to the ceiling. And I never fell out of it, but it makes it very hard for me to sleep because I'm always afraid that I'm going to roll over and fall down from that height." And she didn't say, "I imagine it goes to the ceiling," or "I hallucinate that it goes to the ceiling." She said, "It goes to the ceiling." And he said, "In that case, I knew what I was seeing. The way she talked, he knew that this was a real symptom and that she's probably an ambulatory schizophrenic, or people use that kind of terminology. Well, whatever it was, he would not have touched that symptom. So he said to her, "That must really be very scary for you, and there's some things that we could give you to make you sleep more easily," or something like that. And she said, "I hate to take these medications. Maybe I'm doing all right without them. I don't really want to take any sleeping pills." He wasn't suggesting sleeping pills. He was suggesting something that might handle the anxiety that she feels. And I don't know whether she accepted any medication. She said, "I just wanted to talk about it." And apparently it made her feel a lot better that he didn't say, "Well, you're crazy, how are you running this department?" And she continued functioning well, and he continued working with her, etc. So presumably her bed still continued to rise up to the ceiling. And she had been working with it that way for years. So, okay. That's the story. So he said there's things that you don't touch, and unless any person's symptoms interfere with their functioning, don't consider it a disorder of any kind. They are compensating in some way that works for them, and you may do them much more harm than good because your analysis and so on, or your medications may destroy that balance that they've managed to achieve with their lives. Well, I could see with Daddy, with Nathan, that he really it gave him some kind of security to have all these things around him. I once talked to him a little about it because I had read how obsessive OCD, and I knew that Lon had been diagnosed with it, is often accompanied by hoarding. And I said, but what I read about hoarding were people even collect things from garbage, things you can't even imagine they would collect, everything. And he doesn't do that. So I talked to Daddy about it. I told him, what they're saying about Lon. Because Daddy recognized right away, he never gave anybody a label. And he objected to, we went to a conference where Jamal asked us to go to talk to the people in the school, in the high school, about him. Because he was, I don't remember now, was he cutting classes? He hadn't dropped out, but did he need some kind of special ed? And he apparently never contributed, never just entered a discussion in class, whatever it was. They had no idea how bright he was. They had no idea how well he read, and so on. And we went to that conference, and Daddy had meanwhile learned from Lon, when he saw New York Times there, that Lon used part of his allowance, or all of his allowance, for a subscription to the New York Times, and read it from cover to cover practically, and we all knew, Daddy and I certainly knew, that Lon had enormous information about things, that when he got a subject that interested him, like the Titanic, he could tell you the name of the captain and all kinds of things about it, every detail. lots of other more important details, everything about it. And when he was still younger, he got interested in dinosaurs, as a lot of little kids do, and he had these little plastic dinosaurs, and he knew all the different kinds, their technical names, Tyrannosaurus, this and that and the other thing. And if I would say, what one is that one? And he would show me how he could tell, don't you remember, Grandma? This is the one that blah, 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 what characteristics showed it, And he was very, very, very well informed. And later on, Jennifer said, and he was very skilled at reading, She had anxiety that when he went to school, to kindergarten or pre-kindergarten, they would think something was wrong with him and put him in a special class or whatever, because they wouldn't have any inkling. Because he also had, it was a motor problem, and he still has a motor problem of some kind. He's very, very klutzy. But he also, now, I don't know, he's being treated by what they call a motor problem, that dystonia, and he's seeing a neurologist. But the motor problem affected his speech. It was really a muscular thing that affected articulation. So his speech was kind of unclear. It's not now, but it was when he was 4 years old or going to pre-K. And they assumed that he was bilingual. So, and the bilingual kids in that school all were speaking,
it's been passed on to me, yeah.
The bilingual kids in that school were all Hispanic. So they were putting him in a class for, children who had to be taught English because they were speaking Hispanic. That's the kind of pre-K he got in. So but anyway, getting back to that conference in the high school.
Right, because he didn't like psychiatric labels, but he also had a very negative experience of psychiatry after World War II.
Oh, I know that,
PTSD,
right. But he did, maybe that was the origin of his not liking labels. I don't know. I don't like labels either. That was one of the things I unlearned.
Well, I told you what my teacher, E.L. Doctorow, called them the industrial form of storytelling.
Right, okay. Well,
I don't care for them either.
Listen,
they imply an
told you this,
exactitude
but I
that's
haven't
not there.
I never told this. I haven't had a chance to bore James with all these stories. But I don't like psychology. Period. I mean, it's awful to have put so many years into a profession which I came totally disillusioned about in so many ways. And I now feel as though if I wanted counseling for my children or myself, I would go to someone who was a religious counselor, maybe, who would talk about, morality and ethics, and wouldn't be afraid to express that person's opinion. Of course, it would have to be a religious one that you agreed with the religion, but this value-free thing where you don't show your own is nonsense. Well, anyway, got back to when I took my first psychology courses at the University of Pennsylvania. Right away, they taught us right away about retardation. It was a clinic that we would go in to observe as they diagnosed a student, kids who came in. It was a famous clinic. There's a dispute whether it's the oldest one in the United States or whether some other place was, but let's say it is the oldest. It's a very, very old clinic with very, very prestigious people in charge.
And now you can't use that term, retardation.
What? Oh, of course not. I'm just about to tell you all the things it has gone through. But when that time, as a psychologist, one of our big jobs would be to test retarded kids and to tell what their IQ was. And if their IQ on this test, and IQ is such a terrible test. I mean, it was so culturally loaded and so on. It was ridiculous. But these were really retarded kids. I mean, there was a reason that they were brought to the clinic, and most of them really were, very retarded, and we don't use that term. But they, some of them couldn't even learn how to feed themselves. I mean, I'm talking about from the most severe to the much lesser ones who, nowadays I would say they weren't really retarded. They're retarded from 9 to 5 or 9 to 3. They don't do well in school. But many of them, I mean, it was ridiculous. They were labeling kids as retarded who went out at noon and shopped for the teachers on their lunch hour to bring them back lunches, and took a couple of buses for various trips all by themselves. And that's not retarded, but so if their IQ was below 25 or below, or 30 or below, depending on which year it was, they changed it. Then they were classified as idiots. And if their IQ was between 35 and 50, they were imbeciles.
Right,
and
I remember books like that.
IQ was from 50 to 75, they were morons.
Right.
Now, not only that, and we had to put it into the report. We had to meet with the parents and tell them the results of the test, like, you know.
Your child is a moron.
Right, and be happy because he's not an imbecile and being a moron. He can be taught certain things. It was awful, and
Right.
and I was not that sensitive about it. I mean, I say now it was awful. I went right along with this thing. I mean, I was just as guilty as anybody else of feeling, you know, that this is my job. I've got to give them this news. And I envied the social workers because they would at least offer them something. You know, like we can help you out. Do you need food stamps? Whatever. They had something good to offer,
Right.
and I had nothing good to offer. I had bad news to offer.
Right.
Okay. Anyway, it went from that to being this to just using a general word like retarded. That was less pejorative. When we stopped using those words, and also, by the way, at that time in New Jersey, which is where I was working, none of them who were retarded had to be admitted to school at all. Not till 1954 did they get admitted to school. And I was working there for several years before we ever had, you would have to say your child is retarded, and there is no, in the public schools, there's no special program for them. And the social worker would sometimes say, well, why don't you go over to the Catholic Church there? I think they have a special nursery school where they're taking in children because they feel that these are the most innocent, you know, children who are, you know, God's children, and they're innocent and they don't commit any sins, and they have a different attitude toward them, and they have different kinds of programs. The social worker said, whatever they teach them, they have a very kind, good way, and a very good way with the parents and so on. This was true. I actually visited a place that the Kennedys had sponsored in New York, and they would talk they were doing a beautiful job with these kids, and they would talk about your father and your mother love you so much. Look at the beautiful clothes they have on you, and so on. Some of these were kids who really looked like definitely as something was wrong with them, but they didn't treat them that way, and they didn't see them that way. They really didn't. It was genuine, and that was lovely. Okay, but that was a private, or at least a church place. Anyway, to get back to what I was saying, what was I saying? For retarded,
Right.
They went on, finally, I mean, I don't know if it happened right away, maybe there was an intermediary step that I forgot, but then they would talk about handicapped.
Right.
From handicapped, they would say, well, you have to not just talk about their handicaps, talk about, in a more positive way, they talked about they were challenged.
Right.
Somebody who's challenged is better than somebody who's just handicapped. And then finally, they came to special needs child. Okay? So everybody knows this is a special needs child, and that covers almost all the diagnoses.
Right.
I mean, whatever your child is born with, if he's born with cerebral palsy, if he's born with an IQ profoundly retarded, you know, below even 25, way down, and can do almost nothing, that's also a child who is challenged. And the parents are challenged in figuring out what to do with them. But we only began to take children into school they had almost been in closets, you might say, because somehow there was all this stigma, so that parents were ashamed to even have them out in public, you know. So the retarded children, whatever you want to call them, the challenged children, but physical challenges we did take, the blind, the deaf, the other kind. This kind of challenge, there were no public school programs at all. You just said, we don't, they can't, they're not eligible, they're not qualified to be in the school, and never will be, you know. so what? And we would also predict, they probably will never learn to write their name, they won't learn to read, they won't do this and that, which turned out to be untrue of some of the higher functioning ones. But anyway, all of a sudden, someone got a law passed, and for a humane law where the public schools had to have departments like ours where children were evaluated, and you had to make a special program for any child, every child, no matter what. Some of it was a little ridiculous because we had children who were so impaired that I told you a story once. I don't let me get in on that, but I went to see him in his special school that Englewood was paying for taxis and special nurse to ride in a taxi and take him to the program. You went, well, no, sorry, this is where I mix the generation. When Nathan had retired, he would often go on these trips to these fairly distant from Englewood schools where we had these special, really challenged children who no public school could handle because they really needed a hospital, And I went in, and I had never seen this child before, so I asked somebody, which one is Eddie? And they said, well, look over there, and he's lying over there. So there was this child lying on a mat, and his eyes were rolled back in his head. I thought, somebody hasn't noticed, this kid has just died or something. He wasn't alive. I mean, he looked like he was not alive. I'm not kidding. And I just was shocked, I said, that one? And they didn't seem surprised at how he was. And he was having speech therapy. And his speech therapy consisted of putting a lollipop on his lips and seeing if he would move his tongue a little and try to lick it. And that's how he was succeeding. He was making progress. And I shouldn't laugh, but in speech therapy, the parents were determined that he would have everything he was entitled to. It was one of these tragic stories where he was a normal child, and when he was 3 years old, his sister, a couple of years older, handled him a plum or part of a plum, and he swallowed the pit and had severe deprivation of oxygen, where he was choking and they couldn't.
That was the origination of the whole condition?
That's right. And so they would take him to Lourdes. They took him one summer to Germany where there was some quack, who said if they could inject him with some kind of lamb cells, and that had a magical, an effect. I didn't say magical, but it was like magic. But it didn't work. I mean, they did, and they had to have a special nurse. I mean, this cost Englewood thousands of dollars out of their school budget every year. So when they would say, oh, the school budgets are going up, and that department, ours, is costing us so much money, what was going on there? You could have one child who, in a small town like Englewood, and you didn't have a program